was 15 years ago, in the spring of '75, that I was last on this ferry in the waters off Hong Kong. I was a foreign correspondent for the American television network ABC, and I was on my way to Vietnam to cover what would be the fall of Saigon to communist forces. ABC had given me a day in Hong Kong to decompress before flying into Vietnam to join the rest of the news team there. So I took a ride on the ferry to the outlying islands for a day of perfect peace and quiet. I knew it would be my last day of rest for some time. What I didn't know is that I would return with the kind of emotional baggage a reporter doesn't usually carry, and with a conscience that has remained not clear but clouded to this day. The images I had of Vietnam were the images the world had, except a few of mine were firsthand. So it was in the final days before the fall, as we filmed people fleeing in panic before the advancing communist forces. Foreign reporters are like war tourists in safari suits, documenting human misery. I thought of this as we watched the southern port of Vung Tau fill up with refugees who imagined they'd be safe there. On April 28th, North Vietnamese commandos attacked a government post at Newport Bridge on the very outskirts of Saigon. Not in 7 years had the war come this close, as I said in my piece to camera, which I thought wiser to perform lying down.
The soldiers behind me are firing at Vietcong units who are 500 yards away, no more. This is the closest the fighting has ever come to Saigon since the communist offensive in 1968. A report on ABC News, Saigon.
That combat report preempted a feature piece I had done earlier in the week about the climate of panic and fear among educated middle-class South Vietnamese with working connections with the Americans who were terrified of retribution after the communist takeover. I had profiled a young translator who was desperate to get his wife and children out of the country and who was convinced he would be killed or imprisoned if he stayed. It was a good story, but events overtook us, and it never got on the air. The film of that story was lost in the chaos of April 29th, which began with the spectacular attack on the airport. Any illusion that there might be a ceasefire was shattered. The attack on Saigon airport came just 14 hours after the installation of a new neutralist president who was to attempt to negotiate for peace. But it's clear now that what the communists want is a complete military victory.
Come on, this way, hey, this way, come on.
The U.S. ambassador ordered the evacuation of Americans and high-priority Vietnamese to be airlifted from the roof of the embassy. It was pandemonium as thousands of hysterical Vietnamese pressed against the embassy gates, fighting to get inside. In the chaos, many families were separated, some of them forever. Somehow, in the midst of that bedlam, my young translator managed to find me outside my hotel. He begged me to try to get him and his family onto a bus, a helicopter, anything. I thought it was madness. I had seen the hysteria around the embassy. I wasn't sure I could get him away. I thought he'd be better off in Saigon. I told him I couldn't help him. I will never forget the look of despair in his eyes as he melted away into the crowd. Of the 7,000 people airlifted out of Saigon on that one last day, including reporters like me, 5,500 were Vietnamese. I was painfully aware of this. Even as I watched South Vietnamese pilots ditch into the sea, barely missing the U.S. aircraft carriers in their breathtaking bid for freedom. The first reports of the communist takeover in Saigon spoke of a spirit of tolerance and forgiveness. There was no bloodbath, and my conscience about the translator and his family was eased for a while. Only later did we learn of the tens of thousands of South Vietnamese who were imprisoned and tortured or sent to re-education camps. And then of the hundreds of thousands who escaped in small boats, an exodus of biblical proportions. It's now estimated that since 1975, 2 million Vietnamese boat people put to sea. 400,000 never made it. A human catastrophe that was largely unrecorded, except for the odd anonymous poem. We are the foam floating on the vast ocean. Our cries are lost in the howling wind. At first, the Western countries welcomed the boat people and took them in. But then compassion fatigue set in, even as the exodus continued. By the end of the 80s, there were more than 100,000 boat people stuck in squalid camps in Southeast Asia, most with little hope of resettlement in the West. Over half were in the British colony of Hong Kong, which by June '88 had ceased to give them automatic refugee status, terming them illegal immigrants until they could pass a screening test that might prove them otherwise. But by June '89, the boat people were still pouring into Hong Kong at the rate of 1,000 a day. At a conference in Geneva, the Western nations, including Canada, agreed that each country would resettle a fixed number of Vietnamese refugees. The majority, those considered to be mere economic migrants, would be sent back to the country they risked their lives to flee. It was what might be termed the final solution to the problem of the Vietnamese boat people. Just before Christmas, the Hong Kong government sent police into a camp in the middle of the night to round up 51 people who had failed the screening test and put them on a plane for Vietnam.
In the news reports of the time, an Oxfam worker put it best for me. Think back, he said, to all the things you have done in the past 7 years of your life. And then think of the boat people who've done nothing but sit and rot in the camps, waiting for an indifferent world to end their misery. I thought back, not 7, but 15 years, to the translator I had left behind in Saigon. And I resolved that I would try to get some family, any family, out of the camps and into a better life in my country.
Toronto City Hall, January 1990. I had joined a small group called the Mountain Fund to Save the Boat People, whose members were among several hundred Vietnamese Canadians gathered in protest against the forced repatriation in Hong Kong. Since '79, the group had sponsored 500 boat people to Canada. But by '89, it was seeing little action on its cases. I thought I might help the boat people by tracing some of the Mountain Fund's cases to the camps in Hong Kong. The first camp I visited was harsh and forbidding, and in the end, heartbreaking. Say Kong looks like a concentration camp, which is pretty much what it is. 7,000 Vietnamese are held here.
So this is the outer perimeter.
This is the main gate.
Not surprisingly, these camps are usually closed to journalists, but the commander made an exception for me.
You've got people who have arrived here illegally. There's no possibility of them being resettled. They're illegal immigrants. They've got to be deported. That's it.
What became clear is that there are two classes of boat people in Hong Kong, and that authorities are taking a hard line towards those who landed after June 16th, '88, those termed illegals. These people must first wait a year or more to be screened, and then they must prove that they are genuine refugees fleeing political persecution, not economic migrants fleeing communism. Clemens says that at least 85% will fail the controversial screening test and be sent back to Vietnam. That's why at the camp school, children are taught in Vietnamese, not English.
No, we don't teach English. English is the badge of the refugee. They're taught in Vietnamese. We don't want to teach English and give them the hope that they are actually going to be resettled in an English-speaking country.
There are 1,000 children in this camp, 200 are alone, sent out by their parents in Vietnam in the blind hope that they'll get to the West. But there is no hope for most of these people. I know I can forget about helping anyone out of this camp, though when I talk to the people, I haven't the heart to say so.
For me, if possible, I would like to go to United States or Canada.
Or Canada?
Yes, because I can speaking French and English.
Though a few have jobs in the camps as teachers or translators, most of the prisoners, and that is really what they are, have nothing to do. So they sit and rot and fester and fight. The camp, like all the detention centers for illegals, is like a tinderbox. Conditions in the camps are deteriorating. There's gang warfare and factional fighting. It often erupts into full-scale rioting. People demonstrate, saying that they would rather die than go back to Vietnam. But these are not always peaceful demonstrations.
As a police officer, I got a big problem here. I like doing things for the kids and sorting that out. That keeps us all human here. As a Hong Kong citizen, I got very little sympathy.
He's got very little sympathy because of this, his awesome collection of confiscated weapons, handmade by the gangs from bits of junk and used on each other.
Scrap metal. They've got infinite time and patience.
Yeah.
Toy cars, melted down.
Mace, it's a pure medieval
Yes,
weapon.
medieval weapons. This is what the man was injured with. You know, the one I told you was stabbed through the lung.
He was stabbed through the
With
lung.
one of these.
Clemens says 2 people have died in factional fighting. Given the weapons at hand, the figure seems rather low.
Hillary, she's trying to take you back up there. Back to her tent, probably. Come back this way. She'll let go.
As I left the camp, the children surrounded me and slipped their small hands into mine, as though I might somehow take them away with me. But of course I knew I could do nothing for them. That's a girl, isn't it? It's a blonde. An abandoned factory shows the other class of boat people in Hong Kong. They have refugee status and they live in open camps like CBC. These are the lucky ones, though I found it hard to think of them that way. They live in bunks stacked 3 high. They're just boxes. These like packing boxes, aren't they?
Yeah,
1,200 boat people are crammed into CBC, which incredibly is thought to be one of the better refugee camps. They will be resettled in the West, though some have been waiting for years. How long have you been here?
5 years.
5 years? How long have you been here?
6 years.
6 years. It was here that I met Nguyen Dinh Tu, an editor of a Saigon newspaper who was arrested 1 week after the takeover. Tu spent 13 years in prison before he finally got out on a boat last October. He left me in little doubt about the probable fate of my translator. So someone like that translator that I left behind in Saigon.
Oh,
what would have happened
there
to
were
him?
a lot of translators, Vietnamese translators, working for American offices.
Yeah. And what would have happened to them?
Well, they had to endure the same fate as we.
It was also at CBC that I ran to ground my first Mountain Fund case. This was a 19-year-old girl called Jan Kam.
Do you have the identity number for the lady?
Well, yes, here's the boat number here. LM2324. That's the boat number. Ah, she's here, she's here. She still hasn't had her baby. Hello. Painfully shy, too nervous to take my hand, Cam was sponsored by the Mountain Fund a 1.5 years ago. She was abandoned by her father and stepmother when they emigrated to France. Frightened and alone, she married a boy in the camp. She was supposed to have an interview with the Canadian immigration authorities in February. Did they come to see her?
The arrangement is after the baby born, then he will have to make another appointment.
Cam is expecting her baby any day now, but she's afraid that will spoil her chances of going to Canada and of ever getting out of this concrete tomb where she's lived for 3 years. I promised to take up her case with the Canadian immigration authorities in Hong Kong, not sure that I've done anything to calm her fears. Next to the United States, Canada takes more Vietnamese boat people than any other country.
Now you all are going to Canada on the 30th of April.
Though some might argue that is not a great deal of people. Most are government-sponsored, like these 6 families, which means they're selected by Canada from a list provided by the UN High Commission for Refugees. Last year, Canada took 900 such people.
Được is Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Yet in another building in the same camp a few hundred yards away, I found another family, privately sponsored by the Mountain Fund, still waiting for acceptance. The Nguyen's have been here for 2 years. Mrs. Nguyen has had a second child since the application was submitted. They were interviewed last year, but since then I've heard nothing. She too is afraid the new baby will spoil their chances of going to Canada. Kai Tak Open Camp, next to the international airport, a hopeless jumble of corrugated shacks. The cases of Cam and the Nguyen's were as nothing compared to what I found here. For 8 years, the Dam family has lived in this packing crate 10 feet by 6, that is, what's left of the Dam family. The patriarch died here last summer. A son was accepted to Canada last winter, leaving an adopted son. A grandson, Tung, who at the age of 14 has spent more than half his life here, and Mrs. Dam. The Mountain Fund applied to sponsor the Dams 2 years ago this December. They were interviewed, and then they say no word from Canadian immigration. Mrs. Dam says she's worried. At 65, she can't cope anymore. She doesn't know what will become of them. And she's worried about young Tung. He hasn't seen his own parents, who stayed in Vietnam since he was 6. Do you get lonely for your family?
Yes.
Do you understand what that means?
Lonely.
Lonely?
Yes. I feel lonely.
You do feel lonely? Yeah. So the Dams can do nothing but sit and stew in their squalid camp, waiting and hoping. I raised the case with Reg Reimer of World Relief, a Canadian church group with years of experience with refugees. He says Canada isn't interested in private sponsorships.
It seems all the more tragic, doesn't it, that in this case, as in many other private sponsorships, there's somebody in Canada willing to help right now. And still, these people sit and vegetate in these awful refugee camps here in Hong Kong. They say that private sponsorships are supposed to get priority, but in actual fact, we know from daily working that they don't. They don't. They just get put back and they get put back.
They're not. It may take that long for the case if it was furthered medically, or as happens in many cases, initially the person was single, then they marry, then they have a baby. So, yes, some cases take that long, but there are good and sufficient reasons. No one goes to the bottom of the pile.
Again, more and more files wherever you look.
Yet the immigration section here at the Commission for Canada issued over 22,000 immigrant visas for Hong Kong Chinese in the last year alone. That is more than the total number of Vietnamese boat people admitted to Canada through Hong Kong in the last 15 years. And then the refugees would be just a fraction.
Refugees 1,500, which is a small portion of that, yeah, tiny amount.
But Padister says that doesn't mean the Vietnamese get pushed aside.
They don't have a low priority for Canada. I think if you look at the overall picture, they have a high priority. We've been one of the foremost countries in the Vietnamese boat, in acceptance of Vietnamese boat people. And I think we rank just behind the U.S. in overall numbers. We've accepted 130,000 or so since the fall of Saigon. I think that's a pretty good record.
The irony is that rich, racy Hong Kong is itself a city of refugees, people who fled communism in China. They now face their own nightmare of repatriation, of being handed back to China by the British in 1997. The closer the deadline, the greater the gamble for all those with no chance of citizenship somewhere else. In the scramble for a passport to a friendly Western country, Canada is the hot ticket. If there are two classes of boat people, there is another super class of refugees here. People like Sandy Koo, a self-made Hong Kong millionairess who applied to immigrate to Canada in the business investor category. All she had to do was put $250,000 into a Canadian investment fund and show her track record as director of her own clothing business. So the whole thing will have taken you less than a year?
Yes, yes.
And it was completely trouble-free? No problem?
No, for me, no problem.
30% of Hong Kong immigrants to Canada are in this business category. The Commission has even started a seminar for all new visa holders. In the concern about a brain drain of rich, educated Chinese from Hong Kong, Canada has been accused of selling citizenship.
I think that's ridiculous. I do, because I think that anybody who applies in the business category, and certainly in the investor category, has to have a good business background. And they have to have money that they've accumulated through their own efforts. So therefore, I think what we're looking for are true business people.
But it still brings me back to the boat people living in misery, and to the Dam family praying each Sunday for release. Of course, Hong Kong business people have great assets as immigrants, but has Canada's tradition of humanitarianism been subverted by a blatant grab for the richest of the rich at the expense of the poorest of the poor?
It seems that way. We have room, and we should have room in our hearts and our country for people that have nothing to offer, except that they've been looking for freedom.
That longing for freedom means that the boat people keep coming to Hong Kong in spite of a policy that will send most of them back. Our cameras were on the spot when a patrol boat intercepted this small group, exhausted and half-starved after a long, stormy passage. One said he was a former officer in the South Vietnamese Army, that he'd spent 8 years in a concentration camp. Tell me, where do you want to go?
I want to go to the United States of America.
You do?
Yes.
You know you go into a prison camp here. Did you know that? In Hong Kong.
No, I think that I will...
He doesn't understand that he and his beautiful wife are going to be penned up again in a camp here for months, even years. He's given first asylum, which means being rounded up with the rest, herded onto a police boat, and transported to an island clearing center to be deloused and washed and fed something. Sadly, the reality for most of these people is that having staked everything, they're on a voyage to nowhere. The refugee coordinator here says the influx of boat people is down 80% this year, but hundreds are still taking the gamble.
It's a tragedy for them. They leave Vietnam because they believe they will be resettled. It causes problems for us, but it's a tragedy for those families who leave in the mistaken belief they can get to Canada or Australia or California.
Some boat people who have failed the screening test or given up hope of ever getting out to the West are asking to go back to Vietnam. Under a program of voluntary repatriation, they're leaving at the rate of about 100 a month. They're paid to leave by the Hong Kong government, the equivalent of $200 Canadian each, which is almost twice as much as the average annual wage in Vietnam. The man who wrote the definitive book on the boat people, Barry Wayne, says the root of the problem is in Vietnam itself and in the grim conditions that has made them boat people in the first place.
Hopefully there might be more sympathy for all the people in Vietnam with a better recognition that the country has to be brought back into the international community and participate in international events and have assistance, economic assistance, so that it can be rebuilt so people won't want to leave.
Before my departure from Hong Kong, I went back to Kai Tak, to the well-equipped camp school funded by the UN, to say goodbye to Young Tung, my special friend. I tell him we'll meet again someday in Canada, as though saying it will somehow make it true. When will I come back? I don't think I'll be coming back. Next time, we're going to meet in Canada. Yes. Right? Okay. So you be good. See you. See you. Yeah. See you in Canada, he repeats after me. I hope so. Immigration wouldn't give specific answers on any of the cases I'd pursued, but they are making their way slowly through the system. And it helps that the Dam's son in Canada signed the sponsorship papers.
It would depend on the family. I mean, the chances are absolutely excellent because they have family. The family is sponsoring them. There is no reason for that general a question for me to say that they wouldn't have a good chance.
At the Kai Tak Departure Center, the same lucky group I had seen on my arrival in Hong Kong were getting ready to fly to Canada. The fact is that Vietnamese boat people, the refugees, not the illegals, are gradually leaving the camps.
There he is.
Thank you.
What strikes me is that suddenly they don't look like refugees anymore. They look like people with a future, on their way to a new and better life. A better life in a faraway place with strange-sounding names like Saskatoon and Winnipeg and Mississauga. I've now accepted that the only future for most boat people now is back in Vietnam, but a reformed Vietnam that is part of the international community. In the meantime, I live in hope that one of my families will make it on that plane to Canada, putting past miseries behind. And I also pray for the forgiveness of the family I left behind in Saigon 15 years ago. For CBC at 6, this is Hillary Brown in Hong Kong. When will I come back? I don't think I'll be coming back. Next time, we're going to meet in Canada. Yes. Right? Okay. So you be good. See you. See you. See you. Yeah. See you in Canada, he repeated after me, as though saying it would somehow make it come true. The optimists say you should hang on to your dreams and never let them go, however distant they may seem. Exactly 1 year later, at Toronto's Pearson Airport, an anxious Vietnamese family wait for the evening flight from Hong Kong, along with a former foreign reporter looking for peace of mind. We had just got word that Mrs. Dam, her adopted son and grandson were on their way to Canada. Then came the moment we'd all been waiting for. Mrs. Dam's sons and daughters and their sons and daughters crowded around their long-lost relatives. They looked dazed, as if in a dream, which is what it was.
How are you? You made it.
For all of us. Long embraces a friend he last saw in the camps as a child. Tung is so overcome he can hardly speak.
Excited.
I'm so overcome I can only speak in the reporter's worst cliches.
Dreams come true.
Yeah.
Right?
The following Sunday, their first Sunday in Canada, the Dams again went to church, this time to a little church in Hamilton, used by the Vietnamese community. And this time not to pray for release, but to give thanks for it. Almost everyone in this congregation had been a boat person once and had known its miseries. And that shared experience made this service very special. I thank God that He showed mercy on us after 9 long years, Mrs. Dam said, her reunited family around her. And I prayed for the forgiveness of the other family I left in Saigon as I watched this happy end to a reporter's atonement.